Hizmet has a signature of a positive focus. Hizmet works for the common good. There is an assumption about peacemaking instead of using force. I appreciate those things very much. I think they're very powerful. A sense of valuing and respecting humanity. I came back a better Christian because of what I experienced when I was overseas. My name is Celeste Krueger, and I live and work in Jacksonville, Florida, in the United States. I'm a leadership and strategic consultant. I do a lot of executive coaching, and I have been deeply involved in the human relations work in this country for a long time. And I first got to know Hizmet through friends and colleagues. At the time, I was the director of an organization dedicated to bringing people from different cultures together. And I was very fortunate to come into contact with my friends at the Istanbul Cultural Center, who started to teach me about Turkey and invited me to go on a trip. And when I was overseas in Istanbul and traveling, met the people, started asking questions, and started to understand more about Hizmet. I wish that I had already had the opportunity to meet Mr. Gülen, and I have not directly, but I've read some of his writings. I find him to be a balanced and thoughtful scholar. I personally have an affinity for the tradition from which he comes. The Sufi way is something that is deeply inspiring to me, even as a Westerner. And when I went on the trip to Turkey, the most special experience for me was the Blue Mosque and going to Mevlana''s burial space. As I read Mr. Gülen, he has great respect for those kinds of principles that are a balance of science and faith, a respect for women, in a context where many people think that's not the case. That matters to me. I'm a woman in the West, and I can ascribe to the point of view that women can do anything, as well as men, even in a tradition that tends to be gesturing toward men in the foreground. Mr. Gülen, I know, has been a subject of much controversy. Many people who are progressive in their thinking are, particularly when they rise to the top or come to the edge of a tradition or a culture, and it feels to me and seems to me that's what he's done. I find no fault. I find every reason to keep inquiring about the work that he's doing and the work that people want to promote because of his thinking and his vision, really. I think among the most significant contributions of Mr. Gülen for the common good are several things. One, a sense of valuing and respecting humanity in general terms, people, regardless of race, creed, origin. I think that his ideas are spot on about addressing poverty and education as a means to helping people move out of oppression. We know from history, we know from our immediate and direct experience, when people are disenfranchised and oppressed, peace isn't present. It can't be. And the way I read Gülen and understand the movement, this is about helping individual people find peace and make a contribution back to the community in a way that supports everyone's good. I think those are important concepts. Eradication of poverty and education, those are tickets. Hizmet has a signature of a positive focus. Hizmet works for the common good. There is an assumption about peacemaking instead of using force. I appreciate those things very much. I think they're very powerful. We've seen illustrations across time. I think of Gandhi and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who ascribed to similar things. Thich Nhat Hanh, the great Buddhist monk who's still living. Hizmet although coming through Islam with a Sufi bent, is attentive to lifting people up without using force. Hizmet does one of the best jobs I've ever experienced of bringing people of different cultures and traditions together in very personal ways, not just theoretical or philosophical kinds of conversations, but people breaking bread together at the table and asking about each other's lives. My impression is that it's a very strong and sturdy movement. It's very organic. It's not at the level of policy making and diplomacy. It's people to people, person to person. And I find that to be energizing and transformative. I'm just thinking, I remember the first time I heard the call to prayer in a hotel on the river here in Jacksonville. I happened to be in a room full of people. There were probably 600 or 800 people gathered. And I've lived here all my life in Jacksonville. This is a very, as I said earlier, Southern Christian environment. And for me, because I value cross-cultural engagement and interfaith matters, to hear the call to prayer in that environment was a beautiful thing. I think it changed something in our community. I think for the first time, some people who wouldn't otherwise imagine or think it possible for Christians and Jews and Muslims to live side by side along with Buddhists and people who may or may not identify in a religious tradition. I think it sort of cracked the sound barrier in a subtle kind of way. Oh, this is possible. Although that sounds like a small gesture, in the shifting of culture and the tilt point, it's big. Hizmet's emphasis on education is brilliant, I think. In my experience, when I get to know another person and another person gets to know me, we humanize each other. And no longer do we have this experience of the other or the enemy. It's just not possible. Even if we come from deeply divided political perspectives, we can still find our humanity. And I think that the first step is always education and one-to-one contact in an environment that's supportive and constructive and thoughtful, challenging even, but invitational. And that's been my experience when I visited the schools in Turkey. I was deeply impressed, from the children to the administrators. I remember meeting a woman in the hallway who was a teacher, and I said to her, "Why do you do this?" And she said, "Because I love these children." I think Hizmet's charitable activities are really smart and well conceived. I think they're both grassroots and practical. I come from a Christian tradition, and I found myself deeply touched by the love and care and dedication of the people that I met who are doing these kinds of activities through Hizmet. And in fact, it reminded me of a quote from Mother Teresa: if you're a Muslim, be a better Muslim. If you're a Jew, be a better Jew. If you're a Christian, a better Christian. And I would say that even though I don't consider myself an ideal practitioner of my faith, I came back a better Christian because of what I experienced when I was overseas, watching what was happening and learning from the people that I was traveling with. I have been to Turkey. It was my real privilege a few years ago, and it was the first time I had traveled to Turkey. My impression of the Hizmet movement is that the people that I met and the experiences that I had represented some of the deepest hospitality I've ever experienced, and that's saying a lot. I'm a Southerner in the United States, and we pride ourselves on graciousness and hospitality and courteousness and things of that nature. In fact, I felt more warmly received than I have sometimes by my own people. And I mean that. An anecdote would be, I can remember the first evening that we had dinner in a home with a family that had a lot of children. And my colleagues and I, maybe there were 7 or 8 of us together that evening, this beautiful spread of a meal. And the children were involved, and the men were serving, and the women were there, and we were welcomed as family members, although we'd never met before. The thing that I remember the most is a little boy, he must have been 5, came up to me and spoke to me in Turkish and welcomed me and hugged me around the legs. And I couldn't help myself. I just wanted to pick him up. And so I looked at his mom and said, "Is it okay?" And she said, "Sure." We had this very sweet embrace. I will always remember that. I understand that there are some criticisms about the Hizmet movement. I also know that any movement in history has been criticized. I think there are always people at the perimeter, and rightly so, asking what's really going on here. And that's healthy. I don't subscribe to just blind optimism. And I would say that I can report from my direct experience that the people I've met are authentic and congruent. In other words, their words and actions match. That I haven't encountered any reasons or circumstances to cause me to question the integrity or the honesty of the movement at large or the people individually. And I have a pretty good gut instinct about those things. I would say that in my experience of doing human relations work over time, professionally, the way to overcome those kinds of suspicions and concerns is to engage one-to-one and in tables or in rooms of people where questions can be asked freely, where it's all right to challenge. And there's an invitation for getting to know each other more and differently. And at every step along the way, early on, when I became involved with the Turkish Cultural Center, now the Istanbul Cultural Center, I had questions. Among my colleagues were journalists and high-level professionals. And we asked questions, and our questions were answered. No one has ever deflected. If I've said, I'd love to see a list of articles, books, people who have both critique and support for it, those have been provided. And so in that kind of a transparent environment, all I know is to keep taking steps forward, and I'm grateful. I'm grateful for the friendships. I'm grateful for the intellectual rigor.
The Hizmet movement gives one an opportunity to understand other cultures by sitting down and having meaningful dialogue and conversation and learn about the different points of view.
The most noteworthy about the Hizmet movement in their work is that they are not restricted to one country and one people. They serve all people in so many countries around the world.